At least 3 or 4 other doctors who are just sitting here waiting for more of the injured to come. We have 3 patients in the operating room at the present time. We have more operating rooms ready to be used if needed. So we don't have a problem with capacity. We do have one problem with probably few too many volunteers. We've had volunteers coming from far out of town, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate them being here. Right now, I think we have all the doctors and all that the nurses and EMTs that we need.
Can you describe the injuries inside?
From there? They told you anything about the numbers of people maybe coming in or that were trapped out there that are affected in this thing?
The question is about the numbers of injured individuals. The most that we've heard from the police department is that there are quite a number who are dead at the scene. There are another large number who are injured, but we have no absolute numbers. We've had 56. I think some of the other hospitals have probably had comparable numbers. So if you add that up, that's easily a couple of hundred injuries.
Can you describe the injuries?
The initial group of injuries that we saw were people who were on the street and outside, and they were injured by exploding glass, and they had many superficial lacerations of the face, the scalp, the back. There was one lady who had her hand on a doorknob when the explosion took place. The door flew open, and the power of the exploding door fractured the bones in her arm, and she's currently in the operating room. Those are being fixed. So the initial injuries were people who were standers-by or visitors or walkers in the street, and then we started getting some children from the daycare center, and then we got some people from within the building. Those within the building were injured considerably worse than those who were out on the streets.
What kind of injuries do those people have?
There are 3 people in the operating room right now. One has an injury to the carotid artery, which is the large artery in the neck. The other one has multiple injuries of the face and neck. The third one has injuries to his leg and the artery supplying his leg. So those are rather substantial major injuries.
You're called a critic.
At this point, yes, ma'am.
How are you spreading the injured among the hospitals in Oklahoma City?
Well, I'm not certain of the overall plan. I have asked that some of the more critically injured people be brought here because of the physician supply we have here. We have many neurosurgeons, many orthopedic surgeons. They deal with the most severe injuries. So I've asked that those injuries be brought here. We're well equipped and well supplied with medical staff to take care of them. I do not know how they're being triaged from downtown. I would think that we could handle any of the injuries, but because of our proximity and because of the enormous number of specialists we have, I think that we should probably be receiving some of the more severely injured individuals.
How will families know the degree of injury and if they're relatives?
Okay, we have a central area for all families. It is in the gymnasium of our mental health center. If any of the families go into the gymnasium, on the wall in the gymnasium, we have a huge board with names of everyone who's been injured and the hospital location of that individual. So it doesn't matter if that individual is here or elsewhere. Come here and you can find out where the individual is. And we also have conditions on a large number of these also. So we'd be delighted to be as helpful as we can for anyone who wants to come to our mental health center.
Tell me about the children that were injured.
You've been listening to a makeshift news conference held out in front of St. Anthony's Hospital. St. Anthony's, as we've told you earlier today, is really just stuffed full of patients right now. One of 8 area hospitals that has been called into service here.
And Devin, we were so concerned about the little innocent victims in this explosion. It's been confirmed now. 6 of the dead are children, 2 are adults. So 6 of the dead are children, 2 of them adults from the explosion in downtown Oklahoma City today. We can't imagine the grief the parents are going through, but our prayers are with them. We know that some of them are getting spiritual counseling right now from the chaplain at the scene at one hospital.
And you see the utter devastation that one explosion caused, because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. So try to imagine 2- or 3-fold happening what we've already seen there. It is just incredible to think that there was that much heavy artillery that was somehow moved into the downtown Oklahoma City Federal Building.
Again, you're looking at obviously aerial pictures from Chopper 4. They kept us out for a while because of obvious reasons, and we respect their demands on that. We are now there with our camera and our chopper, and it gives you a bird's eye view of the devastation. Again, one more time on this, because we've been hoping this wouldn't be the case, but it is the case. 6 of the dead are children, 2 are adults.
We've been listening to our sister station in Oklahoma City, and graphic detail of precisely what's happening there. If they're correct about those bombs, and that damage was done by one bomb and the others were even larger, it's surprising that there's anything left of that building at all. We talked about the injuries, and as the doctor in that news conference detailed the injuries to people, none mentioned burns. No burns were mentioned at all, but we did learn that one of the children taken to the trauma center suffered burns over 55% of the body. So it apparently, there was fire along with the explosion that damaged some of it.
We have an update on the explosion. Something just crossed the wires here, and urgent. The head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, says, in fact, now a car bomb caused the blast in Oklahoma City here. He says, the director says it would take anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives to trigger the kind of explosion that we saw. He said they believe the bomb was actually in a vehicle that was parked in front of the building. He said they're now investigating all kinds of theories, but he says it would be premature to speculate at this point who is responsible. But he does say, in fact, that it was some sort of car bomb that was stationed in front of the building, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds of explosives. And Jess, you talk about the kids. You don't need to be a parent to understand the tragedy and what the parents are feeling there. The one hospital reported there were 12 kids there, anywhere from 2 months to 18 months old, who had suffered injuries, and they're actually putting out calls over the radio and television there trying to describe these kids because they're injured so badly, they need to go into surgery, and they need parents there, and they need parents' permission to get in there and help them out.
We should remind, too, the reason for the children being there, on the second floor, there was a child care center, and you can imagine the parents trying to get to this location to try to find out about their children and being kept away because of the imminent danger that was there as well. That car bomb suggestion by the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, they're saying specifically a car bomb caused the blast, and that would seem to explain, when we saw in the aerial shots, we could see cars burning, and the cars were not all that close to the building, and one would wonder how they happened to catch fire, and that would seem to explain that too.
Also, we've heard some of the survivors this morning talk about the explosion. They said the windows blew in as opposed to exploding outward. And if you look at the damage of the building here, you can see when you see a wide shot here, there's actually a chunk, almost like a big bite out of the building, and the whole front of the building is gone, much like the bombing in Beirut, I believe in 1983, when we talk about the suicide bombing at the Marine barracks there.
Exactly.
Pretty much the same pictures.
And a former Oklahoma Congressman, Dave McCurdy, who says this is an obvious terrorist attack, pointed out that there had been meetings of Muslim fundamentalists in the area, including supporters of Hamas. And that is the technique that's been employed by Hamas in the Middle East, to car bombs.
Also, if I remember correctly, when authorities were evacuating reporters from the scene there, they wanted them away. They were checking cars. There was a report earlier this morning from one of the people on the scene from our sister station that they were looking at cars, asking people to stay away from the cars, asking people not to use their cell phones down there so as to trigger a bomb. Ken Shocknick standing by at the update desk in the newsroom right now. You have more to add?
Well, Colleen, everything that you have said certainly is getting a lot of scrutiny right now by ATF agents and other emergency investigators and squads who are going to the scene, because certainly that appears to be what they are facing right now. It does appear to have been a car bomb, at least says the ATF. Something on the order of 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives. And this word also from the Dallas field office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, that it was in the rubble of the first blast this morning that a second explosive device, if that's what it was uncovered. Reading now, the bomb unit is currently examining that object there in Oklahoma City. There's no solid determination whether, in fact, it was a bomb device, but that's what ATF and investigators believe it to have been. So that may have been one of the other additional bomb devices that we've been hearing about throughout the morning. So at last check then, and we've all heard this together, the very sad news that there are 8 known fatalities amid all this rubble. 6 of the victims are children. Might they have come from the daycare center that was inside this Murray Federal Building? That has not been determined yet. Their identity is not known in all cases. But 6 of the 8 victims, the fatalities, are children. Scores more injured, the toll well more than 100 at this point, and it is expected to rise as the day goes on. People still trapped inside at this point, and so that's the priority, as well as the priority of trying to make certain that no other devices are going to go and explode. We've heard this morning that there was a new evacuation ordered, a new threat at a nearby biomedical services building, that perhaps a block or 2 away. So at this point, not just the emergency workers who have to deal with injuries and perhaps fatalities, but also the emergency workers who have to deal with bomb detonation. Oklahoma City is a sophisticated area. This is not the Wild West anymore, and yet its bomb disposal units are not as crack as you might expect to find, say, in Los Angeles or New York City, where international sophistication is pretty much the rule. So at this point, other bombs have been found. No other explosions have occurred this morning. The White House has called a crisis meeting. It was called by White House Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. At last check, as far as we know, it still is going on. The federal government is gearing up to treat all of this blasting as a terrorist bombing. As we get more information on that, the outcome of the White House crisis meeting, we're going to bring it to you. So that's what's been going on right now. The key at this moment, the 2-pronged attack. 1, for emergency workers to get injured people trapped inside, out of the building, and 2, to make certain that no other bomb devices are found or allowed to detonate. More information from the update desk as we get it right now. Back to you, Jess and Colleen.
You talk about Oklahoma City being a sophisticated community, and indeed, of course, it is, but can there be a less likely place for international terrorists to want to strike if it were Hamas, traditional users of car bombs? But federal buildings everywhere are now being carefully watched. In the local federal building in Westwood, just off the San Diego Freeway, only one entrance is now open to people, and everyone going in and out is being checked very carefully there. We also have word the federal building in Wilmington, Delaware, has been evacuated. This as a precaution. They will not say whether a threat was issued there, but they have evacuated the federal building in Wilmington, Delaware as a precaution.
As well, Jess, this morning in Boston, the federal building was evacuated. There were unconfirmed reports of a bomb threat there. Also, the IRS, the employees there noticed that apparently a secured office had been tampered with. This happened about an hour after the federal building, the explosion in Oklahoma City. That was about 8 o'clock our time. But again, this explosion in Oklahoma City happened about 9 o'clock. People were at their desks on this Wednesday, the middle of the work week here. We heard from one of the hospital spokespeople just a few moments ago that they've treated as many as 56 injuries and more at that particular hospital, one of the trauma units in Oklahoma City. They said they intend to send some of their triage units down to the federal building, but the problem is right now, because of the bombs or the 2 other devices that were apparently found there, they've had problems getting in. They do acknowledge there are injured people still in the building here, but as well, to compound all of this, we understand there's a water main break in the building here, so the building is flooding. There are people trapped in the lower floors in the basement area, and as we heard, there are a number of dead at the scene. The doctor giving the news conference described one woman who apparently had her hand on a doorknob, and when the explosion hit, he said the force of the door threw her back and fractured all the bones in her arm. She is in surgery right now.
Take a look at the cars burning there, and that certainly would lend credence to the suggestion by the head of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that it was a car bomb that caused the blast, and that it would take between 1,000 and 1,200 pounds of explosives to trigger such an explosion. They say authorities believe the bomb was in a vehicle that was parked in the front of the building, and we saw in some of those shots of the windows, you said, Colleen, that the windows were blown in rather than out, and we could see the frames of the windows bent inward as well, indicating perhaps that the explosion came from the outside. Security has been tightened, or at least there is caution being exercised at the criminal courts building downtown, where we've had a number of bomb threats over the recent months. Tracy Savage is down there now. Let's go to her. Tracy?
Well, hello, Jess. The disaster in Oklahoma City, some 1,500 miles away, but here in Los Angeles, they are not taking any chances. Right now, I'm out in front of the criminal courts building, a building that is always, well, the security here is always very tight, but one of the guards in there told me he just got a call from one of his bosses telling him today to pay special attention, to keep his eyes open for anything suspicious. Now, we just came from the Federal Building. If we can go ahead and roll tape, it's the Federal Building at the corner of Temple in Los Angeles. You can see what they are doing there. There is a security guard there. When we left that building just a few minutes ago, there were 2 guards there, and what they have done is they've closed every door except one leading into the building, and they are only allowing people to come in through that one door. Every person that comes in is being checked. They're going through their bags, they're going through their briefcases, they're checking IDs of the federal employees who are going into that federal building. Again, just not taking any chances. We talked to one woman who was on her way in this morning who was caught off guard a little bit by the extra security. Let's listen to what she has to say.
Oh, so they're protecting all.
What do you think about that they're doing this in this building?
Well, I'm glad at this point. If there's a danger in other cities, it's just everyone's in a hurry. So.
Kind of inconvenient.
It is, but if it protects people, I guess it's okay.
And we're back here live again. She says if it protects people, she says it's okay. You're looking at pictures of Oklahoma right now up in the corner there. Again, tightened security here in downtown Los Angeles, here at the Criminal Courts Building and over at the Federal Buildings. No word how long they're going to have those guards posted out in front of the Federal Building, but if you're going to be coming down to the LA area and you're going to be going into our government buildings, be prepared. There may be a bit of a delay getting inside these buildings here in Los Angeles. I'm Tracy Savage reporting live. Back to you in the studio.
All right, Tracy, thank you. We have an update now on the number of people hurt. They now believe at least 200 people were hurt in that explosion in Oklahoma City. As we've said, as many as 8 people are dead at this point. 6 of those fatalities are children. We talk about what was in the building there. If you're just now joining us, this is an explosion at a federal building in Oklahoma City. It happened about 7 o'clock our time this morning, about 9 o'clock their time. There's as many as 500 workers in this building on a normal business day. This is a building that houses the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, recruiting offices for the Air Force, Customs, Secret Service, the VA, Social Security, the General Accounting Office, and as well on the second floor, there was a daycare center here, and that's where the number of fatalities from children has come from.
It would appear that Oklahoma City has a pretty good emergency response team because they are getting to those people rather quickly. We saw triaging of patients there. We heard the physician at one of the hospitals talking about 56 doctors taking care of 56 patients. He said there'd been an extraordinary response from the medical community in Oklahoma City, and this certainly is a challenge to them. Let's go to Kent Shocknick for the latest upstairs. Kent?
Okay, Jess, thanks very much. We'll keep the pictures on the screen right now so that you can see what's happening. But as we approach the 11 o'clock hour here in Southern California, we do know that, as you have been saying, the toll continues to go up. The federal government now treating this as a terrorist car bombing, responding as such. The explosion in Oklahoma City has resulted in at least so far 8 fatalities, 6 of the victims, unfortunately, children who may or may not have been in the daycare center at the time when this blast ripped through the building, 9 o'clock Oklahoma City time. Scores more injured. The toll now at least 200. That figure we know is climbing. 200 is just the best available last count. The bomb that went off apparently was planted in front of the building. It appears to have been something like a car bomb, so perhaps it was not found inside the building. ATF saying it did indeed explode. It went off on the first floor of the Murray Federal Building. Other devices were found inside. However, none of them detonated. Workers still at this hour, some 3.5 hours after the initial blast, continue to be trapped inside. President Clinton has offered help to the scene. We know that emergency crews from federal, state, local agencies all responding. Governor Frank Keating of Oklahoma has said other governors are responding with whatever offers of assistance they can. Fort Sill in Oklahoma has launched choppers to come in and help with evacuation of the area as the smoke continues to billow up, even from the pictures taken earlier this morning throughout the area. The workers still left in the area, out of their buildings. They've been told to evacuate. The state has said government workers should go home unless they are emergency workers. And this is where it happened. If you're not familiar with the area of Oklahoma City, it is an area that's growing quickly. It's an area that has recovered well from earlier economic woes. And it's an area that is sort of turning into a new South. If Atlanta and Orlando, Florida were the places to go in the early 80s, Oklahoma City and other parts of the great American West have become destinations in the mid-90s. Places to go for employment, good schools, that sorts of things. Right now, we first want to go to the White House to find out the latest from Washington, D.C., and then we'll continue with our thoughts.
At the federal agencies that are responding and tell you a little bit about what the President's initial concerns are after hearing about this incident shortly after 10:30 this morning. Obviously, the President's first and foremost concern is that every thing be done to assist those who have been victims of this incident, to make sure that we've got the right and necessary type of assistance available to local authorities in Oklahoma City, and he is satisfied that those steps are being taken. Secondly, he wants to make sure through proper law enforcement that everything is done as quickly as possible to bring whoever is responsible for this incident quickly to justice. Now, he directed this morning Leon Panetta to convene an interagency working group here at the White House that would just review how federal agencies are now responding, and we're satisfied based on the report that we have from the Department of Justice, from GSA, from the FBI, from FEMA, from the Secret Service, from the Marshal Service, from all the relevant federal agencies that might have a role here in dealing with this incident, that we have a very good federal response in hand. The federal government has activated an emergency response plan that we train for and that we have in place so that we can coordinate an interagency response to incidents like this. The Department of Justice had already responded, had FBI personnel in place, a variety of law enforcement efforts underway. They've established a mobile command center in Oklahoma City with FBI, FEMA, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, the Marshal Service, and GSA in place to give updated information to folks here in Washington. The President has directed for the emergency response efforts that James Lee Witt, the Director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, go to Oklahoma City to coordinate the emergency response. So we'll have DOJ coordinating the various law enforcement efforts that will be underway, and FEMA responding to the emergency situation in place. Mr. Panetta has been briefing the President regularly. The President, I expect, like many Americans, has been watching the developments as he sees them on television and getting updates from the Chief of Staff as we go along. I'd ask that you, for inquiries about the various things going on in Oklahoma City related to law enforcement, you stay in close contact with Carl Stern over at Justice, and for the work that FEMA will be coordinating, that Maury Goodman will be a good point of contact. They'll be coordinating some of the interagency public affairs efforts as we go along.
What do you know about it so far in terms of the casualties and possibility that it might have been a bomb?
Well, we know very little hard information. We've heard a lot of different reports. We're getting good information from the field, but they are at the very early stages of investigating this incident, and it is way too early at this point to draw any conclusions about what has happened in Oklahoma City. Clearly, there's been a devastating explosion that's occurred at this federal building, but the cause of it is unknown. Those responsible are unknown at this point, and we'll have to develop that very carefully in the course of the coming hours and days.
Casualty number?
We don't have a reliable one. That's being worked on. Again, stay in contact with the local authorities on the ground there who will have the best information as they get it available. Yeah.
Has security been heightened in federal buildings and here in the White House?
Well, we would take at any moment like this. You're seeing now a variety of sporadic reports from federal buildings around the country that are getting alleged threats. And, as federal agencies do, we will respond appropriately. We have directed that federal buildings take any necessary precautions just to respond as they would in a routine way anytime we sense that there is some reason to believe that there's an incident that's occurred that raises the level of threat.
Any reports of a threat in Oklahoma City that may have preceded this?
They are looking now through everything available in the information that was available to the federal government to see. We don't have a concrete answer. We're not aware of any at this point.
Are you aware of any kind of conspiracy or plot that would spread this?
We're at the very early stages of investigating this incident, and it would be way too early to develop any good information on anything like that yet, Jill.
Mike, in terms of the response here at the White House, when these interagency groups
start up. Is there a process where they automatically do things, or has the president jumped in himself and said something must be done?
There's a good federal emergency management plan in effect, which includes, a White House component that the Chief of Staff is now executing at the direction of the President. Obviously, in this situation, the President wants to make sure that the White House stays right on top of an administration response to make sure that the appropriate things are being done. But we're satisfied in large part because of our experience in dealing with incidents of this nature or related types of incidents. So we've got good planning in effect, and that's all underway at this point.
That went automatically into effect, you're saying?
There are a lot of things. The federal agencies like the FBI, like Justice, like GSA, did have planning in effect that kicked in automatically, and here at the White House we established a small interagency working group to make sure we monitored all the proper developments from these various agencies.
Will this affect the security plan for the White House, the future plan?
It's entirely too early to say. That was a review that was still at the Treasury Department, and we'd be jumping to conclusions if we suggested there was anything about today's incident in Oklahoma City that had any bearing on that security review.
Would you like to make a statement before the end of the day on this?
I suspect the President will. I think later in the day, I think he wants to make sure that people have got the best information available to him, and I suspect later in the day he'll be here, yeah.
Security here at the White House, have you done?
We've taken precautions that we would normally take following an incident like this, yes. Yeah, Jack.
Mike, you talked about persons unknown responsible for this. Can you confirm that this actually was a bomb, and can you say what kind of bomb it was?
I would hesitate to do that because there are people on the ground that are looking very carefully at exactly that type of question. I can tell you that law enforcement officials are investigating it as a crime scene, and they are, for that reason, all the relevant law enforcement agencies are in place and responding. Yeah, Ann.
Plan you refer to, was this developed after the World Trade Center or in recent months?
Well, there's a variety of that type of planning that has been in place over time. I'm not sure when it came into effect here. Having participated in another federal agency, I know that they routinely update a lot of their planning activities, and I think they do build on past experience.
References to procedures normally taken after an incident such as this. I don't recall X-raying of lunches and bags and stuff after the World Trade Center or after any other incident in recent years. Maybe I just didn't notice, but isn't this some new level that we haven't seen before?
I think we are taking precautions as you would expect us to take following an incident of this nature and following threats that have been going to some isolated federal facilities around the country. I'm not aware of any threat here directed against the White House. I'm not, I don't know entirely about all of the federal installations around Washington. I only know about here at the White House. Yeah.
Is there a likelihood that the President will want to visit the site at some point?
Oh, he wants to make sure that the proper law enforcement is in place and that the right emergency response is taking place. It's way too early to make judgments about that.
Can you confirm that they found an unexploded bomb or an unexploded device?
I cannot.
How many threats have been received around the country? Can you give us any idea? But
we frankly hear about them from news organizations probably even faster than we hear about them through the channels that we've got available to accumulate accurate information. There have been several on the wires already, as you probably know. Yeah, Jack.
Will Justice or ATF, the FBI, give a readout or a detailed briefing on this by the end of the day?
Yeah, they're putting in place their own planning to respond to public inquiries about what's happened and make sure they've got people in place both in Oklahoma City and here in Washington who can respond to specific concerns, and they will do that. I've talked, as I mentioned before, both to Maury Goodman and to Carl Stern at Justice and FEMA, respectively, and they're going to be in a position to tell you more about how their agencies and subordinate agencies are responding.
Yeah. The groups that are already being looked at or scrutinized? As those who may have...
No, I'm not aware that they've developed any leads that would suggest a target for an investigation at this point.
Did the President change his plans in any way today?
I don't believe so. He proceeded with the meeting with Prime Minister Chilair, and he's got some additional meetings taking place later today, and he will, as the day goes on, be updated on a regular basis by either the Chief of Staff or anyone else appropriate working with this interagency group.
Mike, is it planned that there would be, one central briefing that would bring in, let's say, Justice and FEMA and everybody else?
Not at the moment. I think that they're all concentrating at their own workplaces, using their own command centers and their own channels back to Oklahoma City. So I think it's more appropriate for them to kind of stay on top of what they've got going on at their individual agencies. We'll check and see later.
You've been listening to the White House Press Secretary Mike McCurry, who is briefing White House correspondents and reporters covering Washington on the situation and the federal response to the bombing in Oklahoma City.
We understand that from that briefing that security at the White House has been increased, but the president has not really changed his plans today. He was visiting with the Turkish prime minister earlier. But we also understand they've set up a mobile command unit in Oklahoma City, FBI, FEMA, Marshals unit set up at the scene there trying to figure out what happened. And we have heard from the ATF that the early initial investigation indicates the explosion was caused by a bomb from the outside, perhaps a car bomb, as many as 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives in a car at the scene. And once you see the picture there, it really tells the story that this was a bomb that came from the outside. The number of fatalities at this point, 8, as we've heard, 6 kids from the, we believe from the daycare center that was located on the 2nd floor there. But as we heard one of the spokespersons from the hospital say, there's still a number of dead at the scene. As many as 200 have been hurt. Ken Shocknick standing by live in the newsroom with an update. Kent?
All right, Colleen, we're going to try to put all of it together then. Let's go immediately right back to the live pictures, and I will talk over them as you continue to watch. First of all, we did just hear Mike McCurry, the White House press secretary, talking about the federal intervention at this point. He said that President Clinton's first goal was to assist the victims of the Oklahoma City blast, then his second goal to bring those responsible to justice as soon as possible. The administration saying this was a terrorist car bomb in front of the building, and as you just pointed out, Colleen, 8 fatalities, 6 of the victims' children who perhaps were inside the daycare center. At this hour, as you watch this newscast, workers still are trapped inside the building. Emergency crews are trying to get them out. Unfortunately, along with those who are alive, they expect to find more who have been killed in all of the rubble. Local security has been heightened. This means not just in Oklahoma City, where there have been other reports of bombs actually being found, but at buildings all around the United States, from Boston to Southern California, where security has been heightened in the wake of this morning's bomb blast in Oklahoma City. So that's the very latest as continuing the investigation goes on. It is way too early for good information about any sort of a plot, the White House said in that news briefing just a couple of minutes ago. The White House is being very cautious about the investigation up to this point, and indeed not giving a lot of details even on the status of the situation right now. So that's something that's going to take the rest of the day to unfold. We will continue to monitor. Jess, Colleen?
All right, Ken, and as you can see, there is, the smoke has now cleared pretty much. They are at a point where one would think they'd be able to get in there and try to get some of the people out of there. Clearly, they've been investigating a great deal. They've had bomb-sniffing dogs in there. They've been trying to rescue those who are injured and they can reach easily. But undoubtedly in the debris, particularly in the lower floors, they expect to find even more dead and injured. So they'll be moving into that pretty quickly. We do see some smoke coming, most of that apparently from the parking lot, which again lends credibility to the theory that this was a car bomb. And in a few moments we hope to be talking with a spokesman for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which not only has an interest in this, but may indeed have been a target of this, since their offices in Oklahoma City are located in that building.
We actually, if you look very closely at the picture there, we can see rescue crews crawling through the rubble there, trying to find more victims. As just pointed out, the problem right now, as we understand it, is there's a water main break somewhere in the building, and some of the lower floors appear to be flooding. So in addition to having injured, perhaps injured people there, they run the risk of drowning from the water main break if the water builds up there. We understand as well there's still a number of dead at the scene.
Throughout the country, we have had reports of possible bomb threats and federal buildings being evacuated. The major federal building in Los Angeles, the one in Westwood, is open. Only one door is open to the public, and those going in can expect to be searched, of course, or have their bags searched. In other cities, Wilmington, Delaware, they have actually evacuated the federal building there. No indication that that was because of a specific threat or whether it was just an extraordinary precaution taken against it. There have been numerous bomb threats around the country.
John, just right now we have with us on the phone John D'Angelo. He's with the ATF here in Los Angeles. Mr. D'Angelo, from what you're seeing of the pictures here, does this appear to be a car bomb from the outside, the pattern of the bomb as it hit the building?
It'd be premature for me to discuss that or really comment on that. The point that I want to make is that ATF is sending 2 national response teams to the location to investigate the bombing incident. A national response team is a unit of 20 people who have expertise in these types of crimes, arson and explosives violations. The team consists of special agents and chemists, and like I said, people who have expertise.
Mr. Angelo, the report is attributed to John McGaw, the director of your bureau, who says an initial investigation indicates it was caused by a large bomb, perhaps 1,000 or 1,200 pounds, located outside the building. He says perhaps in a car. Let me ask you, do you know whether all your agents are accounted for, those who were employed in that building?
Yes, I have been informed that all of our agents have been accounted for.
As well, Mr. McCaw mentioned to news agencies this morning when asked about terrorists, he said, I think anytime you have this kind of damage, this kind of explosion, that's the first place you have to look. Do we know of any terrorist groups in Oklahoma City or any in the southwest area?
At this point, the incident has not been attributed to anybody, and to my knowledge, nobody has taken credit for it. It is something that we obviously are going to have to take a hard look at with all the other agencies that will be involved in the investigation. At this point, we can't rule out anybody or jump to any conclusions.
Mr. D'Angelo, the mayor of Oklahoma City has just said that he has word that there is an 8-foot crater in the parking lot where they believe this bomb would have gone off. Would that figure, if you had a bomb of 1,000 or 1,200 pounds, an 8-foot crater?
Yeah, I think that would be reasonable. Again, that I have not gotten that information from any sources within my agency or an agency investigating the bombing. But yes, it would be likely that a crater would be left from a large explosion.
It must not be lost on members of your agency that this is the second anniversary of the tragedy in Waco, Texas, a tragedy those cult members blamed on your agency, on the ATF. Any response from your people on that? Does that concern you that it happens on this anniversary date?
We're treating this as an independent event that we will investigate and follow down all potential leads and avenues. As I said earlier, we're not going to jump to any conclusions or go off on a tangent. We'll be looking at following all leads.
As well, Mr. D'Angelo, there is some confirmation that a second, perhaps a third device may have been found at the scene. The director of your agency talked about as many as 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives in a car outside the building. How difficult would it be for a group to get their hands on that amount of explosives?
It really depends on the group, what their sophistication is, what their connection is, or what their level of familiarity with explosives is. It's not all. It would be difficult for most people, but if a person had the desire and the know-how, he could get and acquire that much explosive.
But it would probably have to be a group or a person who's in the business who knows what they're doing here.
It would be obviously somebody who knew what they were doing to make a bomb of that size.
If the other bombs were planted inside the building, is it conceivable that the car bomb outside would also be expected to detonate those?
Really, I can't speculate or comment on that. We don't at this point know exactly what was used or how it was done. We could really shoot around a bunch of hypotheticals, but it would be not practical until we have a better idea of what happened and what has been recovered.
When would you expect to have that information, Mr. D'Angelo?
The teams are going to be on scene, may even be on scene right now. I'm not sure if they are or not. And we'll be working on it, trying to come up with answers as quickly as we can.
And clearly this will be a coordinated investigation?
Yes, FBI, ATF, in the state and local agencies there in Oklahoma.
Earlier we heard reports there were some threats against the FBI, but as we look at our rundown here, the FBI is not even housed in that particular building. Have there been threats against the ATF or any other agencies in the building that you're aware of?
Not to my knowledge.
Is it uncommon for bomb threats and other threats to be made against federal agencies such as yours? Do you receive them often?
We do not receive them often, and it's something that we consider to be very serious. We follow up, we do investigation on them.
Are you surprised that we've had a number of reports of bomb threats throughout the country, triggered, we assume, by this bombing?
No, I think if you look historically, that's something that's not that uncommon. When a large incident happens, you have copycats, or in fact, maybe people that weren't responsible for the bombing making other threats.
As we look at the pictures here, a lot of us have brought up the comparison of the bombing in Beirut in 1983 of the Marine barracks there. As you look at the pictures, does anything strike you, any similarity to any other explosions you've seen?
This explosion is obviously of immense magnitude, and looking at the pictures, the whole front of the building is blown up. To me, it ranks with any other explosion, large explosion.
Are you as surprised as most of us are that if this were a terrorist attack, and particularly if it was from forces outside this nation, that Oklahoma City would be the target?
It's surprising that it happens, period. I mean, nobody's expecting this or really was prepared for it.
What about normal security in a building like this? Your agency is located there. We also know the DEA is located there, and we haven't really explored that area, but the Drug Enforcement Agency, of course, dealing with cartels in the drug area. What sort of security would you expect going into a building like this?
Well, it's typical of the security at federal buildings. That's handled by the Federal Protective Service and the Federal Police. That is probably the agency that you should contact for information about the security around the federal building.
What is your agency's responsibility in dealing with issues like this? It isn't principally investigatory. I would assume that the ATF has as its goal keeping explosives and devices like this out of the hands of those who would cause problems like this.
We do have a jurisdiction over explosive violations, bombing violations, and whatnot. It's crimes that we actively investigate. We have a unit here in LA that's specifically dedicated to arson and explosives investigations. Whenever we develop information that somebody is amassing explosives illegally or somebody intends to do something with the explosives illegally, we obviously take action.
But you do try to keep the explosives out of the hands of people like this, don't you? Isn't that part of your responsibility?
And you have to, along with that, is that whenever the explosives are getting in the hands of somebody like this, it's probably done in an illegal fashion. They're sold illegally or manufactured illegally.
We talk about perhaps terrorist groups being involved here, and again, officials have said with a bombing of this magnitude, that's really the first place you have to look. When we talk about the federal agencies being involved, who really keeps tabs on the terrorist groups in this country? Is it the FBI? Is it the ATF? Is it the Secret Service? Whose job is that?
The FBI has primary jurisdiction over terrorist violations, terrorist crimes.
And once again, we're talking with John D'Angelo, who's a spokesman for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and that is the agency that was housed in that, the Oklahoma City agency that was housed in that building. Mr. D'Angelo, how great, this is far too speculative, but if this can happen in Oklahoma City, it can happen anywhere. Is terrorism the crime that is most difficult to defend against?
That's like, as you said, a very speculative question, and I'm not really prepared to discuss the issue comprehensively. As I said, FBI has primary jurisdiction over terrorist activities.
Mr. D'Angelo, you talked about 2 national response teams heading to Oklahoma City. Any ATF agents from the Los Angeles area?
Yes, the team leader from the we in Los Angeles contribute to the Western Region Response Team. The team leader is from Los Angeles, as well as another person who is on the team as a special agent here in LA.
Who takes the lead in the investigation here? Is it the FBI or is it the ATF?
This is something that will be worked jointly and will be worked, as I said, together with the agencies.
If this were a retaliatory bombing, a hate crime, a bombing based on political activity, would you not expect some group to claim credit for it? Indeed, like the bomb threat, you'll probably have many groups claiming credit for it?
At this point, we'll be following all leads. If somebody does take credit for it, it's an avenue that will be pursued by the agencies working the investigation.
And again, you said you have spoken with some of the agents in your office in Oklahoma City, and they're all accounted for at this point?
I have not spoken to any agents, but the information I'm getting from within the agency is that everybody is accounted for.
Okay, John D'Angelo, thank you very much. ATF spokesperson here from Los Angeles, as he reported there are 2 national response teams on their way to the explosion in Oklahoma City, some of them again from the Los Angeles area. Right now, I believe our Wendy Takuda is standing by live at the update desk with the latest there. Wendy?
Right, Colleen. If you're just tuning in right now, you're looking at the screen here. You can see the smoke coming from the Alfred Murrah building in Oklahoma City, the federal building there, after a huge explosion just after 9 a.m. their time this morning. A massive rescue effort underway. And right now, this is the information that we are getting over the wires. The head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has said that they are investigating the possibility that this was a terrorist car bomb. And we know right now at this point, or we believe that there are workers trapped inside the building as the rescue effort proceeds underway. 60 rescue teams have been dispatched from around the area. 66 people from Tinker Air Force Base, we know, have been sent to the scene. And we understand that teams from Sacramento and Phoenix are on alert right now, rescue teams. We do not have word whether they have been dispatched. The word at this point still remains at 8 fatalities. 6 of those victims are children, as we have been discussing. There was a daycare center in the building, and we believe that that is where those children were killed. 200 people at this point have been injured and sent to hospitals around the area, and we are beginning to get reports as people in those hospitals describe what they saw inside the building, watching the debris explode around them, and many of them saying that they would not have survived had they not gotten underneath their desks inside of the building. Across the country at this point, federal buildings, including the federal building in Los Angeles, are in a state of heightened awareness. They are restricting access to those buildings. They are not doing building-wide searches unless those are called for. Once again, you see the pictures here of the building in Oklahoma City after that explosion. Experts here in Los Angeles are now saying it is going to take weeks to determine what type of explosive was involved there. But again, the quote from the head of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is that anytime you have this kind of damage, you have this kind of explosion, you have to look at the possibility of terrorists. The director, John McGaugh, also saying that he believes that it probably was a car bomb outside of the building that caused it, that bomb was a very large one, from 1,000 to 1,200 pounds to have caused this kind of damage. So that's the situation at the scene, and again, around the country as federal buildings go into a state of heightened alert. Back to you, Colleen and Jess, for now.
Thank you, Wendy. One of the most descriptive responses came from Carol Lawton, who's a secretary in the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Said she was sitting at her desk on the 7th floor when this explosion hit. All of a sudden, she said, the windows blew in. She said it got real dark. The ceiling just began coming down. She said she then heard the roar of the whole building crumbling. She managed to crawl down some stairs and wasn't injured, as a matter of fact.
Another worker who actually wouldn't give his name, he was just lucky to be alive and was very thankful for. He said, I came out from under my desk because, as we heard, most of the people, when they heard the explosion, they weren't sure whether it was an earthquake or a sonic boom, or in that area is Tornado Alley, so it could have been any of the three. They were not prepared for what they saw. He said, I came out from under my desk. There wasn't any building left around me. The whole office area was gone. And as we said, more than 2 hours now after the explosion, there are still people trapped inside the building there. Some people report they had to crawl out on their stomachs, feel their way around. There was no electricity. This is a 9-story building in the downtown area. And if you look very closely, if you look in some of those areas, the gaps that used to be windows there, you can see rescue crews crawling around trying to find some of the survivors. We know that there are still a number of dead at the scene. The confirmation we have is 8 dead, 2 of them adults, 6 of them kids. But again, there are still a lot of people trapped in the rubble there, and a number of people dead at the scene. We understand as well that triage units, as soon as they had given the all clear, the fact that there were no more explosive devices on the scene, as soon as they had gotten that, the triage units were going to go in and try to pull out some of the critically injured people who are still trapped at the scene there.
It was interesting to note from the aerial shots we saw a few moments ago, you would see a very darkened area in the parking lot where one could presume, I guess, that the car was located. And then the destruction in the building was sort of a semicircle, as though a bite had been taken out of the entire side of the building. The mayor of Oklahoma City, Mayor Ron Norick, has reported there was an 8-foot crater in the parking lot, presumed to be beneath the car that exploded, with the 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives within it.
Something we're not taking into account, but if you've lived in the Midwest at all, and if you've lived in an area that has tornadoes, you know there are usually basements or underground parking here. So we're not really sure. When the ATF director talked about perhaps a car bomb, it may have been outside the building, it may have been underneath the building. It's hard to tell at this particular point.
We talked about Mayor Ron Norick. Let's take a listen to what he had to say just a few moments ago.
Inside, it's got about an 8-foot crater, and you can see where the car was. And so it was not, first thought it was in the parking garage, but apparently it was a car bomb on the street.
And how large of a crater did it blow?
About 8 foot deep in the street. and melted a couple of cars together. So they'll let you all in there eventually, and you can take a look at it.
Again, that was the mayor of Oklahoma City. And, you know, we talk about the number of injured, as many as 200 at last count, but that was some half hour ago, so no doubt it's higher. One of the more poignant stories or things we heard about this morning was from some of the reporters at our sister station in Oklahoma City. The fact that they were announcing over the radio or over the television, the airwaves there, they were describing little kids who were in the daycare center, kids who were anywhere from 2 months old to 18 months old. Their parents had no idea where they were. They were in a hospital, they were in need of surgery, and in order to get parents' approval for that sort of thing, the kids didn't know their names. The best they could do was simply issue a description over the television, give the area where the child was located, and ask the parents to show up there so as to help out. And you know, a lot of kids in that situation. This one particular hospital had as many as 12 from the ages of 2 months to 18 months old. The 18-month-old, if I remember correctly, was critically burned.
55% of the body.
55% of his body.
The description of one child, all they could offer to those in Oklahoma City while they were trying to locate the parents was, she's a 2.5-year-old child. She has red hair and blue eyes, and that was the best description. She was one who needed surgery, and they did need the parents there.
You don't need to be a parent to understand that situation there, to feel the empathy for what the parents are going through. Again, we are looking at live video. This is unedited video of the scene here. As we look through, you can see file cabinets, desks. Every once in a while, you can see the head of a rescue worker going through there. As we mentioned earlier, they have bomb-sniffing dogs. There were reports at least one, perhaps two other devices were found at the scene, and so that's what they're doing right now.
We've talked about other federal buildings around the country being on special alert. Some have even been evacuated, and the federal building in Westwood, our local federal building, is under special care as well. Kelly Mack is there now. Let's go to her for a live report. Kelly?
Well, Jess, there are 17 floors here at the federal building in Westwood, and there are approximately 1,500 to 2,000 people who actually work in this building day to day. But of course, there are hundreds more people, visitors, who come into the building to use the various offices and facilities every day. You may be able to see part of a line behind me right now. There are people who are applying for passports, and normally there are a line of people here, but these people are being checked out very carefully. Of course, employees who come in and out of this building are also being checked out very carefully as well, much more carefully than they normally are. When they come into the building, their IDs are being checked by one officer from the Federal Protective Services, and then when they turn the corner to go down toward the elevators in the federal building here in Westwood, another FBI agent checks those IDs again, just to be sure that those people are who they say they are. Now, these security measures, of course, these extra security measures were taken right after the bomb, the news of the bomb in Oklahoma City, and we are told that these protective measures, these extra security measures, will be enforced until further notice. We are trying to get our camera mobile here. Maybe we can take you in a little bit closer right now with our cameraman, Daniel Peak. You'll be able to see that some of the Federal Protective Services officers are watching these people very, very carefully. A lot of these people are familiar to them, employees who work in this building every day, but nevertheless, they have to look at these at their badges as they come in. There is one metal detector in the federal building here in Westwood. They have not placed another one because of this bomb threat all over the country right now. But they are asking people who are not familiar to them, people who are non-employees who have to go into the building, to go through this metal detector, as they always do. But they are carefully checking these people. The passport folks, the folks who are here in line to get their passports, are being kept about 6 feet away from the door, and they are being checked as they go in by a Federal Protective Services officer. Only people who have a reason to come in here are being allowed in. They're being asked, what is your business here? What floor are you going to? If it seems legitimate, they're being asked to proceed. But it's interesting how they started this. At first they were a little bit hesitant to tell us that they had extra security measures here at first, but then it became very, very obvious about a half an hour after the bomb went off in Oklahoma City. They had more officers out here, and of course the extra FBI agents checking the badges, so it became very obvious that this was something they were taking very, very seriously. Live in Westwood, Kelly Mack, Channel 4 News. Back to you.
Kelly, we talk about the security inside the building there. We have learned initial investigation in Oklahoma City shows that perhaps this may have been a car bomb from the outside. What about security in the parking lots around the federal building in Westwood?
Well, right now it appears that most of the parking is outdoors. Like a lot of places here in the Los Angeles area, there are no basements. Most of the parking is actually east of us in a large parking lot. So we have not actually noticed any extra patrols of security guards in that area at all. But of course, cars and vehicles of any type can't get that close to the actual building. There is a big promenade that you've got to pass through before you get to the entrance here, and so any large vehicle that would try to get up to this area would have a very hard time of it. So that is probably one thing that they don't have to be as concerned about here in Los Angeles as they would elsewhere, because there's no parking lot underneath this structure at all, Colleen.
All right, Kelly, thanks very much. Various agencies have been put on special alert, and special precautions being taken everywhere in Orange County. In Santa Ana, Vicki Vargas is at the office building which houses the FBI. Vicki?
Indeed, Jess, things are a little bit different here in Orange County and other places of the state and across the country. The FBI is housed in federal buildings. Here in Santa Ana, the Orange County offices of the FBI are housed in a private 4-story office building. It's at the corner of Flower and Civic Center Drive. And we are told that about 9:45 this morning, a bomb threat, a call came into the offices of the FBI. Now, they occupy both the 4th floor and the 2nd floor of this building. But also here are members of the Orange County Public Defender's Office, as well as some offices of private lawyers, and the management company is on site as well. I want to talk with Maria Shikati. You said the phone call came. Was there an immediate reaction to say, everybody get out?
Immediate reaction, yes. They just walked out of the restrooms. There was about 5 FBI agents scattering throughout each and every floor, grabbed me, said, get out, there's been a bomb threat, get out immediately, don't go to the parking garage, don't go to your cars, go across the street.
About 100 people, I think we estimated, had to be evacuated. A little bit nervous, obviously, when knowing what had happened in Oklahoma City today?
Yeah, it was just amazing. You wonder what is going on. Could this be real? It just seemed so far-fetched, but obviously it is definitely a scare for everyone.
Now, I know that in the federal building, the federal courthouse here, there are metal detectors, there are X-ray machines. None of that exists in this building, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Make you feel any more vulnerable?
Possibly. I mean, obviously what happened in Oklahoma this morning has set everybody across the country in an alarm. So knowing that we feel safe with the FBI here in one hand, but by the other hand, you feel, geez, are we really safe?
Possibly more of a target since they are here. There is a 3-story garage as well in the back where cars moved out of there. People told to get away from that area at all?
No, we could not remove our cars from there. That's where we all park, all the FBI agents as well as anyone who works in the building. We could not move our cars because they have to have the dogs go and sniff around the cars. We actually had to just give them identification of our car, the color, the make, the model, so that they could look for any suspicious cars that might, be in the parking garage.
Okay. And any word yet on when, if at all, you'll be allowed back in that building?
They said 1 to 2 hours.
Okay. Thank you, Maria, very much for talking to us. We do know that even though Santa Ana Police, Santa Ana Fire are on scene, it appears the FBI is handling this investigation. As you heard Maria mention, there are bomb-sniffing dogs that are inside. They are apparently going door to door. As you heard her also talk about the possibility of a car that could have been parked nearby, taking this threat very serious. Initially, there were calls that the federal building in Santa Ana, which houses some probably 400 or 500 employees, was also the target of a bomb threat. In fact, some members of the bankruptcy court were evacuated, just a handful. Then they learned that the threat came to another building. They were allowed to go back in. So obviously a lot of people on edge here. This threat, though, they're taking very seriously. I'm Vicki Vargas reporting live from Santa Ana. Back to you.
Vicki, let's go back to the time frame just a moment. What time did the bomb threat calls come in? Vicki, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Can't hear. All right. I assume those came in after the Oklahoma bombing. Therefore, you could assume they might be copycats.
Copycats. Certainly, there's been evidence of that throughout the country. The situation in Wilmington, Delaware, where they had to evacuate the federal building because of bomb threats there. Also, the situation in Boston this morning, where they evacuated as well. And we should mention as well that in Oklahoma City right now, the governor has declared a state of emergency. He has sent all federal and state workers home for the time being while they investigate this, try to find the source of the bombing there.
We figure 9 o'clock Oklahoma City time, 7 o'clock our time. 7 in the morning, my guess is that Santa Ana office building was not occupied like that, so the call clearly did come in after this.
We are looking at some of the people from the scene. Keep in mind, as you see kids there with their heads bandaged, there was a daycare center on the 2nd floor here. The latest number we have is that six of the 8 dead are in fact kids who were probably from that daycare center. And if you look as well, when we see the pictures of the building, we talk about the rescue crews there. We understand the assistant fire chief in Oklahoma City says that they are right now crawling on their stomachs through that area. It's a very dark area. There's no power, no electricity there. So they're crawling on their stomachs trying to find victims, survivors who are still trapped in the building. They're trying to reassure the victims that they're doing everything they can at this point to get them out of there, but there are still people trapped inside.
And looking at the victims who are being brought out, it seems apparent that most of them were injured by flying debris. We heard a hospital spokesman speaking earlier this morning that one man had a vein problem where he'd been struck with shrapnel. So those are the kinds of injuries we're seeing there, and undoubtedly there will be a greater indication of loss of life once they are able to get in there and to remove much more of the debris. Let's go to Wendy Takuda, who's, I'm sorry, you wanted to...
Well, I was just going to address the picture you're seeing in the upper left-hand side of your screen, the gentleman who was crawling out there. That was a ladder that was going to the 5th floor. He's one of the survivors that we heard from earlier in the day. He's a man who got under his desk when he heard the explosion. He was on the 5th floor when the building actually almost imploded, and he was able to get out. Didn't even have a scrape on him when he got out this morning, amazingly enough.
All right, as I was saying, we'll go to Wendy Takuda for the latest now. Wendy?
Hi, Jess. If you're just tuning in, let's review some of the facts and update the situation for you. Once again, a large-scale terrorism investigation is underway after that huge explosion at the federal building in Oklahoma City this morning, and you're seeing the remains of that building on the pictures here. The mayor of the city described an 8-foot crater in the street in front of that building. The mayor saying that it actually melted some of the cars together at that site, and that is one of the reasons why, of course, that they believe that this was a bomb. They believe that a bomb, in order to do this kind of damage, would have to weigh about 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. President Clinton is expected to speak at any time. We're waiting for that. Already, spokesmen from the White House have described the federal effort underway to not only help the people on the scene, but to try to find out who is responsible because, of course, no one has claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, a security alert has been posted at all federal buildings across the country. They call it a state of heightened awareness, access being restricted to federal buildings, and you've been watching what has been going on here in Southern California with regards to that. No building-wide searches for the most part unless warranted. Our understanding at this point is that workers are trapped inside the building. We have no numbers yet, no exact word on where those people may be trapped. We have heard that there is an underground garage in this building, so that could be a problem area there. Rescue workers have been dispatched from around the area, as you can imagine, and that includes 66 rescue workers from the Tinker Air Force Base nearby. And workers on the scene say that when they crawl in through the rubble and they find people, they have to actually crawl in to get to the people who are trapped. They have been comforting the people there, telling them that help is on the way, but this is going to be a very, very slow process getting those people out because, as you can see from the pictures, we're talking about an immense amount of damage and a lot of rubble on top of those people where they're trapped. A lot of the people saying that they would not have survived the explosion had they not gotten under their desks immediately. Some of those people describing that when they came out from their desks, there was nothing left on their floors. Again, at this point, we are talking about 8 fatalities, 6 of those people children, apparently from the daycare center on the 2nd floor of the building. And right now, the number remains at 200 people injured, 200 people sent to hospitals in the area. There were 500 federal employees assigned to this particular building. The explosion happened after 9 a.m., so we do know that that was during business hours. Obviously, we have no count of the number of people in that building aside from the employees. That building housed military recruiting offices, drug enforcement agency offices for the Veterans Affairs Department. So once again, a large-scale investigation going on at this point, as well as a huge rescue effort underway. There was a second unexploded bomb, they believe, that was found in the building. We have not gotten word that that was absolutely, that has been detonated yet, or they've been able to get that out. But we do know that they found what they believe to have been a second unexploded bomb in this building. So that's the situation now with the latest, and we'll keep you up on it. Jess, Colleen?
All right, Wendy, thank you. We talk about the ATF sending in a couple of national response teams as well. We heard from the White House today. The FBI, FEMA, and the Marshals Unit have set up a mobile command unit. We don't know that there's been a call for mutual aid from surrounding states. We do know, however, a lot of agencies are on standby right now, waiting for that call. One of those agencies on standby, the fire station in Sherman Oaks. That is where Doug Kriegel is standing by live. Doug?
Well, Colleen, actually 2 units, one from Sacramento and one from Phoenix, have already been dispatched to Oklahoma City. These are people who are search and rescue teams specially prepared for this kind of situation in Oklahoma City. So actually we now know 2 teams, one from Sacramento, one from Phoenix, have been dispatched to Oklahoma City. And here in Los Angeles, fire units, specially trained people for this kind of situation, have also just been put on alert. With me is Captain Ron Lydecker, who heads up this special unit. Captain, what does this mean in terms of alert?
Basically, it's just a notification that there has been an incident. There are some activations occurring throughout the country, and it puts us on the next higher level footing. Start wrapping up some loose ends and basically do some preparedness things to make sure we're all ready to go.
How many people here would go to Oklahoma City if you were called?
If the Los Angeles City Task Force was activated, as well as any of the task forces in the state, it's a 62-member task force. They're equipped for rescue, technical search, including canine search. There's a command element, medical element, and a lot of technical specialists such as hazardous materials, logisticians, structural specialists, and that sort of thing.
Apparently they're talking about people still trapped in the building. Would a canine or dogs be helpful in that role?
We have quite a technical search capability, including the canines. They can do probably the most rapid and effective search. Once we start getting into some serious debris piles and that sort of thing, we have seismic and acoustic devices, we have fiber optic devices where we can make access into voids and actually do a physical search without getting in there to locate people.
Now I realize this is a long ways away, but if this happened in LA, how would you handle it? What would the approach be, sir?
The Los Angeles City Fire Department has 3 full-time urban search and rescue units on duty every day, staffed by 10 people each. They would be, of course, the first responders. We have, of course, our regular fire companies that have some basic urban search and rescue type equipment. And, of course, we have the task force, which is a full complement of equipment and personnel designed to operate for 72 hours without any other support. And they would follow on with that for any major incidents.
Thank you very much, Captain Ron Lydecker. Again, units in Los Angeles have been put on alert, and already fire teams, search and rescue teams from Sacramento and Phoenix are being sent to Oklahoma City to help out in this disaster. Reporting live, Doug Kriegel, Channel 4 News. Back to the studio.
All right, Doug, thank you. And we're going to go to Oklahoma City via telephone to talk with the spokesperson for St. Anthony's Hospital, Elizabeth Laurent. Ms. Laurent, what's your situation there?
We have currently admitted 56 patients to the hospital, and we have 1 confirmed fatality, which was a child. And we have medical personnel both from the hospital and from other hospitals around the metropolitan area here staffing our emergency department.
What's the nature of the, I'm sorry, Colleen, what are the nature of the injuries for those 56 you had?
They are wide-ranging. Some are lacerations and bumps and bruises that can be treated and the patients can go on. Others have been admitted. There have been some surgeries. Some are in intensive care. Really a full range of injuries.
We had heard earlier that at Children's Hospital there were as many as 12 kids admitted there. How many children do you have? You mentioned one of your fatalities being a child.
Yes, we have 1 fatality, which was a child, and I think we have had some other children admitted, but I can't confirm a number at this point.
Are you the hospital that talked about the little 2.5-year-old girl? You had put out a bulletin for the little girl, her parents to show up so they could approve surgery?
If that was done, it was done from the emergency department and was not something that went through this office.
Have you told us how many of the 56 are children?
No. At this point, I can't confirm how many are children that have been admitted here to the hospital.
Several?
Probably several, yeah.
Earlier we had heard that triage units were still heading over to the scene there, that people were still trapped in the building. Can you confirm or shed any light on that for us?
As I understand it, there are still people trapped in the building, and they are trying to find them and evacuate them, and we are expecting another wave of patients here shortly.
Earlier we heard a spokesman from your hospital, a physician, talking about plenty of resources for taking care of those who've been brought in. Is that still the case?
Yes. This is a large hospital, we have a large staff, and then with all the other medical personnel from around the metropolitan area who've come over to help out, we have plenty of staffing and plenty of supplies at this point.
As well as the number of survivors at the scene, we heard a spokesperson from a hospital, I'm not sure whether it was yours or not, talk about the number of fatalities still in the rubble there. Do you know anything about that?
No, I sure don't.
All right, Ms. Wren, thank you very much for your information.
Thank
We're
you.
going to go to Greg Weissman now, who is out in Riverside with an urban search and rescue team. Greg?
Yeah, Jess, this is Station 11 here in Riverside. This is home to the Riverside Urban Search and Rescue Team. While they have not been put on alert yet, as Doug Kriegel reported, 2 teams have been sent to Oklahoma City, one in Phoenix and the other in Sacramento. Now, this is some of the equipment that Station 11 has that if indeed they did go to Oklahoma City to help out with this rescue effort, they would have all of this equipment available to them. Now, with me here is Captain Mike Parrish. He is in charge of the Riverside Urban Search and Rescue Team. First of all, a question, what are some of the folks going back there, the rescue personnel, what are they going through right now to try to find some of these victims?
Well, the main thing they're probably doing right now, they're in transit going back to Oklahoma, and they're starting to think about the type of search that they might be doing, and search and rescue is probably the biggest thing on their mind, and that is the type of search. It's either going to be a physical search where the rescue people are in there actually digging through the rubble pile, or if they're going to use their technical search or canine search. And I have some of the technical search equipment to share with you that
Jess and Colleen, let's point out real quickly, this is the team that you might remember from the Northridge Meadows apartment during the Northridge quake. They used a fiber optic camera to find some of the victims that were in the rubble. And Captain Parrish, if you could maybe explain to us what this device is and how they might be using it back in Oklahoma City.
Yes, the 8 California task forces all have the same kind of technical search equipment that was purchased from OES and given to our task forces. We have the search cam and the seismic technical listening equipment. The search cam we used quite a bit at Northridge Meadows. It allows us to extend this camera down into a void where we have somebody trapped or suspected to be trapped, and the operator can control the camera from the handle. He can control the light.
And then here he can see what he's looking at.
Yes, right here on the operator's chest you wear a monitor. You can see the configuration of the victim. You can talk to the victim. It has a two-way microphone. It has an articulating head. The camera can be moved 180 degrees. I can control the sound and the light, and it helps medically also. The doctors can see the configuration of your victims and make better decisions on how to treat and remove them.
So this is a vital tool that they would probably use given all the wreckage back there of this building.
From the things we're seeing on television so far, you have 9 stories that are in different stages of collapse. There's going to be a lot of voids, and there are people missing, and a camera like this can go down into the small holes. You bore a hole, extend your camera down, and it saves putting people down there, and it really makes it a much quicker, more efficient operation.
And Captain, while you're not on alert right now, is there anything in particular that your team is doing to prepare if they did go to Oklahoma?
Well, one of the things that we are doing right now is making sure I've contacted all of our participating agencies, and I've had a flood of calls this morning, as you can well imagine, and everybody is on kind of an unofficial alert that if we were to get the call, we'll certainly be ready and have about 43,000 pounds of equipment and our people ready to go.
The most important thing, you're ready to go.
Yes, sir.
So Jess and Colleen here in Riverside, while they are not on alert, they are prepared if they are called to go back to Oklahoma City. Reporting live in Riverside, I'm Greg Weissman, back to you.
All right, Greg, thank you very much. We're just looking at the wires here. I understand we have a report from Reuters that the FBI at this point is searching for 3 suspects and a car, and we understand from the director of the ATF that he says, and I'm quoting here, clearly the explosion occurred outside the building. They're trying to reconstruct at this point. What they're trying to reconstruct is that apparently a vehicle was pulled up in front of the building and detonated shortly after 9 o'clock. You've heard the number, 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of explosives. He says he estimates that's the amount that would take to shear off the front of this building. Half of this 9-story building completely sheared off. Also nearby buildings damaged. Windows within a 2-block radius were blown out, and we had talked about people describing the explosion 55 miles away. The death toll confirmed now at 8, but expected to go much higher.
Here now is that Reuters report. The FBI issued an alert today for 3 suspects in the explosion at federal office building downtown, according to sources there. The FBI alert has been issued for a years. One of the passengers described as 20 to 25 years old, another 35 to